Just a heads up before we get started here. The following story it's a no nonsense story. It's not another bump in the night story. It's a history. It's a thing that happened and it's affected a lot of people, a lot of people's lives. Truly, it's unsettling. I have something of a misfortune of having to deal with tragedy on a daily basis in my professional life, and so maybe I'm a bit more callous than the average person, but still, this particular story is especially upsetting. So, that being said, just take that as a warning. Philadelphia is the largest city in the Commonwealth, and it's not even close. Its neighborhoods are large and spread from downtown Philly into several counties. The Fox Chase Burholm neighborhood is more heavily populated than the county seat where I live right now, but it wasn't always that way. At the northern end of Fox Chase, near the Pennypack Creek, sits Susquehanna Road, which, in the 1950s, was not much more than a country lane with no houses on it, save for a home for wayward girls. Today, crossing Susquehanna Road and going north near the intersection with Ferndale Street, you would come upon a condo, but back in 1957, you would have walked into a copse of trees, and it was there on February 25th, 1957, that a LaSalle college student found the body of a young boy. The boy who would be known as the Fox Chase Boy, and more famously as the Boy in the Box. Though the LaSalle student, Mr. Bononis, discovered the boy on the afternoon of the 25th, it was not until the next morning that he called the police. He told the police that late the afternoon before, while driving along Susquehanna Road, he had seen a rabbit run into the brush. He parked his car and went after the rabbit, and that's when he came upon some traps. Trappers were known to place traps in the area in order to capture muskrat. However, Bononis noticed the box and, investigating it, saw what he thought was a doll or a small child. He immediately left the area. His reluctance to notify the police was attributed in part to shock, as well as to the fact that he was known to watch the young ladies at the Home for Wayward Girls, which was located adjacent to the area where the boy's body was found. Police who arrived on the scene saw that it was apparent that this boy was malnourished. He weighed about 30 pounds. He was between maybe 4 and 6 years of age. His death had been the result of trauma, primarily to the head, though there were bruises covering most of his body. He was naked, save for a plaid flannel sheet, which his body had been wrapped in, before being laid in a cardboard box which at one point housed a J.C. Penney bassinet. His nails had been trimmed, and his body cleaned. Whatever party responsible for the boy had also hastily cut his hair, and clumps of fresh hair clung to him. He had been sitting in the weeds and the brush alongside Susquehanna Drive for perhaps a couple of days, but maybe as much as a week or so. The police went about their business in searching for the child's identity post-haste. He was fingerprinted and pictures were taken of his face. They even dressed him up in contemporary clothes and propped him up into a sitting position and photographed that to make him maybe more recognizable somehow. The boy, fair complexion, blue eyes, brown blonde hair. The police went through hospital records from hospitals in the Philadelphia metropolitan area, comparing footprints recorded with birth with those of the boy, but a match was never found. Those who examined the body noted that along with the bruises there were several scars on the boy, presumably from the look of them from surgeries. Some of these scars suggested that the boy had a blood transfusion at least at one time. He did not show signs of having been vaccinated. He did show signs, though, of having an eye condition, perhaps chronic. An autopsy also revealed that the boy hadn't eaten for some hours before his death, but that he had vomited before he was killed. Dermatological evidence suggested that the boy's feet and hands had been submerged in water near the time of death. The police assumed that the identity of the boy would be quickly established. Most likely, it was speculated, the boy's parents would come forward and confess that the boy's death had been some accident, and in their fear and nervousness, their panic, they tried to cover it up. But as the days went on, the police redoubled their efforts, investigating each lead as it came, going as far as to trace the origins of the box that the boy was found in. It was actually from the J.C. Penney in Upper Darby neighborhood, where a dozen such bassinets had been sold between December 1956 and February 1957. There was some white scuffs marking the inside of the box, suggesting that the bassinet that it originally contained was white as well. The box was in good condition, and it was sent over to the FBI crime labs in order to go over it for prints, but none were able to be lifted from the box. The flannel blanket, too, was tracked down to two possible manufacturers, one in the Carolinas and another up in Quebec. It would be impossible, though, at that time to narrow it down much further. A few feet from the discovery site, and along a trail in the wood that led to the site, the police found a man's hat. It was blue, made of corduroy, a scally-type hat. It had a leather strap and buckle in the back. The earliest lead of promise came from the hat, whose label indicated that it had been made by Robbins Bald Eagle Hat and Cap Company of Philadelphia. If I remember correctly, they were down on 7th Street. And by remember correctly, I mean I read that recently. Police followed the lead and learned that the hat had been sold sometime within the previous year. A dozen or so such hats had been made of the blue corduroy, but this one was memorable because the customer who purchased it had returned to the store requesting that a strap be placed in the back. The store's owner, Mrs. Robbins, was interviewed by police. She stated that the customer was a man most likely in his late 20s or early 30s. She stated that he didn't speak with a foreign accent and wore working clothes. She told the police that the man bore a resemblance to the boy in the box, whose picture was now everywhere in southeast Pennsylvania and into New Jersey and even up in New York. Speaking of New York, the police in Philadelphia went so far as to contact police in Nassau County, New York, to see if the Fox Chase boy could be one Stephen Damon, who, along with his sister, was kidnapped from a Long Island bakery on Halloween Day in 1955. And though his sister was discovered not far and in good shape after, Stephen was not found. He was a little over 2.5 at the time of his kidnapping. There was a good chance that, considering the malnourishment and the abuse that the boy who just discovered in Fox Chase went through, that these two boys were the same age and perhaps the same boy. But prints and facial features, and it was ruled out. To this day, the fate of Stephen Damon is unknown as well. Other missing children from other missing states were referenced, and not only the neighboring states of Delaware, New Jersey, and New York, but also Rhode Island. There was even a woman that called from Oklahoma believing that the body may be that of her son, who she had not seen in 2 years. Authorities in Philadelphia followed her up and followed all these leads up, but nothing came of it. The year prior to the discovery of the boy's body off Susquehanna Road, the United States opened its doors to a wave of Hungarian immigrants who were escaping an aborted uprising in the autumn of 1956. There was some speculation by investigating officers that their mystery boy could have been a recent immigrant, and this would explain why they were having such difficulty identifying him, especially through fingerprint and hospital records. In 1965, thousands of records were scoured through at the immigration offices, and the police were able to identify a boy whose immigration photograph looked uncannily like the boy they were trying to identify. This lead ended up, however, when it was confirmed that the boy was alive and well and living in the Carolinas. Throughout the remainder of the 1950s and 60s, numerous leads were explored and ultimately exhausted. There was multiple people brought in for questioning, including several who were apprehended in a single evening's raid. Local foster families were considered especially suspect, but the children in their care were all accounted and well. More than one family, extremely abusive families who were known to have deliberately killed or killed through neglect their own children and disposed of multiple children, were also explored. At one point, it seemed as though the mysterious Fox Chase boy, America's unknown child, had just materialized along a roadside in a rural town at the edge of Philadelphia. The boy was buried, but was exhumed from the Philadelphia cemetery in November of 1998 so that DNA tests could be done. And mitochondrial DNA was taken from the boy's teeth, as the rest of the body was too far gone after more than 40 years. The boy was reburied, this time in a donated plot at the Ivy Hill Cemetery in another northern Philadelphia neighborhood. The biggest lead that the police had in the later years of the case, which remains open to this day, came in early 2002 when an Ohio businesswoman contacted the authorities. The woman had been opening up to a psychiatrist for over a decade about her childhood, which was a series of terrors. During an interview with investigators in 2002, the woman, who is only publicly known by the letter, the variable M, stated that she grew up in Lower Merion, just northwest of downtown Philadelphia in Montgomery County. Her parents, teachers at the local school district, were sadists, her mother in particular. M's mother was sexually abusive to M, and she stated that in 1954, when she was only a 10-year-old girl, she took a ride with her mother to a neighborhood of Philadelphia where her mother purchased a toddler from a family. The frail child, whose name was Jonathan, was the locus of the family's abuse, and he lived in the basement, not to be seen by people outside the house. M told the police that Jonathan had mental problems and was nonverbal. One February day in 1957, Jonathan vomited up his baked beans. M's mother was livid, and she placed Jonathan in the bathtub and proceeded to beat him, taking his head in her hand and smashing it against the wall. M stated that she had to sit on the toilet in the bathroom while this was going on, and afterwards she helped clean and trim Jonathan before they wrapped his body in a blanket and loaded it in the truck of their car. M and her mother drove around the outskirts of the city trying to find a place to dispose of Jonathan. They eventually settled on the Susquehanna Road because it was a remote place, but ironically, as they pulled over with the trunk ajar, a driver came by and asked if they needed help, but they were able to send him along without him noticing anything. The cardboard box just happened to be on the site already, and so Em and her mother tucked the boy into the box so that he'd be less likely to be discovered soon, and then they drove away. Early in the investigation, the Philadelphia police did speak with a motorist who described a scene very similar to what M would describe 50-plus years later. And though the investigators on the case in 2002 were intrigued by M's story and noted that many of her details were accurate and made sense, they were unable to corroborate much else of her story. There is, too, some concern regarding how credible a witness M is. Next February will mark 60 years since the boy in the box, also known as America's unknown child, and maybe possibly even once known as Jonathan, was discovered along the street in the area of Fox Chase. As time goes by, there is the obvious concern that the people responsible will never be apprehended and are quite possibly already dead themselves. But for the community, as well as for the people who were professionally and otherwise involved, answers are needed, and not just for peace of mind, but in the hope, too, that somehow unraveling the past mystery can somehow prevent future atrocity. Again, it's an upsetting story, it's grisly even, but there are some good things, like having the knowledge that the investigating team over the course of 59 years have cut no corners and have followed every lead, and that retired officers still haunted by the case continued to pour into its investigation on their own time and on their own dime. The case has been featured on television shows such as America's Most Wanted back in 1998, and there's a webpage created by a concerned citizen who had hoped that the mystery would one day be solved. It's the authoritative site on the subject, and you can find it at americasunknownchild.net.